IRRST, or the internal rotation resisted strength test, or there's the Hawkins-Kennedy impingement sign. Which one did we talk about is the better test, or the best?
Hawkins-Kennedy.
Hawkins-Kennedy, okay? So that's always going to be the number one test that you do, is the Hawkins-Kennedy. Always start there, okay? And then you move on to the IRRST, the internal rotation resisted strength test. Okay? And then you can do a variety of other things. Usually when diagnosing SAI, there's a cluster of tests that the PT will do. It involves the Hawkins-Kennedy, it can involve the empty can test, it can involve what's called the painful arc test, which is simply you have the patient go through the motion, as much motion as they can in scaption. And with the painful arc, a positive would be that they have no pain to a certain degree. I can't remember the degrees off the top of my head. They have no pain, and then midway through they have pain, and then at the very end they have no pain anymore. That was the painful arc test, okay? And that would be a positive if they have pain through just that middle portion of the arc. Then supraspinatus weakness, all these things, they'll do a bunch of different tests to really diagnose SAI, and then just a cluster of tests. But so the first one that we're going to start off with is the Hawkins-Kennedy test. So just kind of a little tidbit here. Students in the past, to help them remember what the Hawkins-Kennedy test is just think of the first part of the name, hawk, okay? How do you always see people who are like bird wranglers? I don't know what they're called. But how do they hold the birds? Like this, right? So that's the position the Hawkins-Kennedy is going to be in. We'll bring our patient into 90 degrees of flexion with elbow flexed as well. So just like this. With your fingers. Okay? So we bring him into this position, and then passively, I'm going to stabilize his elbow. Passively, I'm going to push him into, so he's positive for other issues. Passively, bring him into internal rotation, okay? And then I'm going to ask him, did that reproduce your symptoms? No, then I wouldn't need to go any further, right? However, if he said yes, I can say, okay, I'm starting to think SAI. I just did the best test for it, but I want a cluster, and so now I'm going to do what's called the internal rotation resisted strength test, or IRRST. Okay, this one again can be a little confusing just because it has multiple parts. Okay? This one is not based on pain, but rather based on the strength of the muscles that we are testing, or the motions that we are testing. So we're going to bring our patient into 90 degrees of abduction, shoulder flexion, and then about 80 degrees of shoulder external rotation. Okay, so here's neutral, here's about 80 degrees. And then I'm going to test, do kind of like a manual muscle test of the motion of external rotation and internal rotation. Okay, so hold it there, don't let me move you. I'm going to push on the back of your hand. Don't let me move you, hold there. Good. Now I'm going to push on the front, hold there. Good. They're pretty equal. Okay, so again, for him, I'm not worried about it. However, on our sheet there, it tells us, gives us a little description of what the difference would mean. So, if the internal rotator is weaker, or the internal rotators are weaker than the external rotators, what is it positive for? Some sort of intra-articular disease, okay? Something that is not SAI. However, if the external rotators are weaker than the internal rotators, then that is a positive for subacromial impingement, SAI. Okay? The patient might have a little bit of pain just because of the position that we're putting them in, but that by itself is not a positive for the test. The positive, we can only get a positive if we manually, or we resist them, and we determine that one direction is weaker than the other. Okay? So again, if the internal rotators are weaker than the external, it's some sort of interarticular issue. If the external rotators are weaker than the internal, then we're talking SAI stuff. Okay? So those two are just part of the cluster that we can do for SAI. Okay?
So